Hey everyone, this is Brad Hughes, School Principal and Chief Encouragement Officer from Ontario, Canada. And I've got some good news for you. You found the Good News, Brad News podcast, amplifying stories of heart-led educators moving from positive intention to action. Great people like you, improving kids' lives through service, connection, and finding the fun. So glad you're here. Let's get started. Hey there! It's great to have you back. So glad you're here and that you're with me for episode 23 of the Good News, Brad News podcast. I am your host, Brad Hughes, and as you settle in and get comfortable for episode 23, there's no need to worry that I'll be giving you the old 23 skidoo. Not a chance, because I don't want you to miss a moment of conversation with my guest, Hedreich Nichols. She's an author, presenter, workshop leader, edtech lead, podcaster, equity advocate, and consultant. She helps teachers and districts amplify the voices of all students and ensure that educators have the skills and knowledge they need to create more equitable classrooms and campuses. Now, Hedreich and I discuss a number of things near and dear to both of us, including how connection and empathy are powerful antidotes to apathy, isolation, and detachment. How the ability to open up to and hold space for strong emotions is both a necessity and opportunity for growth and companionship. And how committing to the community work of anti-racism depends on first committing to the inner work. Now, episode 23 got me thinking about 23andMe, the service that allows you to better know your ancestry using DNA, and to explore questions like, who am I? Who am I connected to? Where did I come from? And how did I get here? DNA, the genetic thread that links all of us. Genomics research at the National Institutes of Health in the United States and around the world reveals that all humans share nearly identical DNA. We are all over 99.5% genetically alike. Consider that despite these similarities, humans disproportionately experience injustice, prejudice, and oppression based on differences, with life-altering consequences. For me, part of the inner work of equity and anti-racism is reckoning with the duality of appreciating where I came from and the life I have now, while understanding that my current opportunities and way of life depend on opportunities or even lives lost by others. Rhonda McGee, law professor and author of The Inner Work of Racial Justice, advocates for challenging the inherited ways of thinking about ourselves and others that reinforce racism and other forms of pervasive bias. Dr. McGee writes, "The inner work is about addressing this, really looking within to see how we've been trained and conditioned through lenses of race, gender, and how their intersections constantly feed the sense that we are different from and even should be afraid of each other." By inner work, Dr. McGee means practices of mindfulness-based awareness and compassion, practices that help us unpack a deeper sense of who we are in ways that counter what she calls a poverty of imagination around what it means to be human and to be alive. Rather than color blindness, Dr. McGee says fighting racism requires developing color insight, the capacity to analyze race and racism in our own lives and in the social settings we're in, with compassion as we go, helping enter into equity and anti-racism discussion more deeply. My guest, Hedreich Nichols, hosts a YouTube series and podcast, Small Bites, with the same focus on expanding that capacity with compassion. 5 strategies in 5 minutes every week, providing actionable steps to help you with the inner work to be ready to challenge racism and to champion inclusion. Hedreich is in it to change the world for the better, one student, one teacher at a time. And her passion and determination really show. I know you'll love getting to know Hedreich today, and after hearing her story, you'll be eager to connect with her too. So, here's my interview with changemaker and equity champion Hedreich Nichols today on the Good News, Bad News podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back once again to the Good News, Bad News podcast. I am so excited to be speaking with my guest today, author, podcaster, consultant, equity champion from Texas, USA, Hedreich Nichols. Hedreich, welcome to the Good News, Bad News podcast.
I want to say that I've been waiting to say this. I am so excited to be on the Good News, Bad News podcast. Thank you for having me. I love a pun. I do.
I do too, and I love having you. This has been a really exciting episode to plan with you, and it's a lot of excitement to talk with you today. So let's get started. Let's dive in and ask you, Hedreich, tell our listeners about all of your different roles, your community, family, professional roles. What lights your fire? What makes you you?
You know what? I think my favorite role, I always say my first job is parenting. You know, being a parent and teaching is sometimes wonderfully congruent, and sometimes it's just a pain because you come home to the same stuff you dealt with all day. But it is my absolute passion, my first job. After that, I love teaching. I love being in the classroom. I write curriculum for our district and do our district lead teaching for middle school, but it does not, and I love that. But working with my kiddos just brings me so much joy. I teach edtech, 7th grade, and they are amazing. And this year they have done some amazing leaning into the process. They have put out, talk about good news, they have put out some crazy, incredible projects and work, and I am so proud of them. So that fuels me. The bridge from being a parent to podcasting and creating content is actually that, you know, when he was a little boy, he was, oh, he's so sweet, he's so cute, oh, he's beautiful. And then he got taller than me. He grew facial hair. And suddenly the world began to see him as, quote unquote, Black man. And that is seen as threatening. And so he's experienced some things in the last 12 to 18 months that made me realize that being a voice at a table with a group of people was just not going to be enough. That if I needed people to hear my story, to see things the way that I have seen them growing up, see experiences, see the lack of reflection, lack of representation in curriculum, in media, if I was going to get people to understand what some of the outcomes of those things were, if I was going to get them to hear my story, I had to get out of small spaces and move into some big spaces. And so that's how I came to podcasting.
Hedreich, through your lens as an educator and also as a parent, what's at stake for kids if adults don't engage with equity work?
Well, there are two things. First of all, if you have diverse kids, diverse populations in your classroom, and they don't see themselves reflected, you're telling them that they're not important. You know what I mean? That I was definitely this year old before I realized that Onesimus was the man who was responsible for bringing vaccine technology from Africa to the United States. How many people know that? How huge is that right now when vaccination is in every news cycle? But we don't see Black scientists in curriculum. We don't see Black scientists being, you know what I mean? We're not represented. And so that would make me think that, oh, well, Black people are good at basketball, but not good at science, or not good at writing, or not good at classic. They can do jazz, but they can't do classical. They can play football, but they can't play tennis. You know, I came up before Serena and Venus. That's what it does. You teach us that we are not important unless we're on a sports field or blinged out doing some rap music and our story, or unless we're the tragic, enslaved, downtrodden people needing rescue. And those are only tiny parts of our story. So we need to represent, and that means that's my story, but all of our kids, this is the melting pot. So let's examine all of those flavors and see how those contributions make our country great. And the second thing is that if you do not teach diverse populations, if you are in an area where there is not diversity and you think it's not your problem, you teach your kids that he ain't heavy, he's my brother, doesn't exist. It doesn't matter. As long as you're okay and your family's okay, then we're fine. And I think that is just a tragedy, because I think I am my brother's keeper. I think that if I'm okay, but you're not okay, then hey, Brad, how are you? Oh, what's going on? Oh my gosh, you forgot your lunch. Hey, I got some extra, one half of my PBJ. That's what makes the world a place worth living in. And so if we are in our little bubble saying that, well, we don't have any Black kids, we don't have any Asian kids, we don't have any Mexican kids, we don't need to talk about that, then you're setting up your kids, one, to think that nobody else's problems are important. I am fine. And you're setting them up for a future of not being able to understand diverse perspectives. And the chances are you're supposed to prepare your kids for the future jobs and the future, being adults. So you think that they're never gonna be in a place where they have to be in a diverse community. So yeah, those are my two things. Those are huge.
Hedreich, as we talk, we are about a year, going on a year and a half into a global pandemic. And we're all experiencing a lot of displacement, a lot of detachment. So in one case, we may be more connected in a digital sense, but because of what we are reckoning with in our spaces through the pandemic, we may be increasingly isolated in a real physical and emotional sense. And as you were just talking about, when we're looking after ourselves, there's that shift to protecting what's ours, protecting what's mine, and that can even lead to apathy. So how can we take some steps to interrupt apathy? How do we challenge that?
It's funny you should mention that. I was talking with a friend who was saying, I just don't have the motivation. I don't have the motivation. I'm just exhausted. I can just barely get up for anything. And I said, well, have you checked with the elder people in your life? Have you checked with your elders? And, well, no. I mean, what's that got to do with me? Said, well, if you find one or two people to care about during a day, you'll find that, one, everybody's got problems. Two, you are using your energy to help others focus on what they're feeling, and you're taking the focus off yourself. And sometimes, many times, we are just too self-involved. And by getting out there, even if it's digitally, even if it's a phone call, call somebody's grandma, call your elderly aunt from Iowa and see how she's doing, and ask her, hear her stories. Hey, what was happening Hey, what was happening in spring when you were 25? And you'll find joy in those connections, and remind yourself that you're not alone. You're not alone. And what you have to offer is valuable to someone else, even if you're feeling apathetic.
Hedreich, let's talk together about small bites. How did small bites get started? And tell me about some reflections about how it's evolved to this point.
As I said before, my son grew facial hair. And that became a problem suddenly. My same little kid who was just, oh, he's just so adorable. Oh, he's so polite. All of a sudden, there were things that happened. He was skating in our neighborhood and took a spill, and everybody gave him the look, the kind of, why are you here? What are you doing here look? And one man actually said, why don't you skate in your own neighborhood? He was down the street and around the corner. He wasn't in his own neighborhood, and on this corner, we live in a kind of a loop. And on this side, everybody knows him, has watched him grow up. And that was literally, 45 seconds down the road where they might not have seen him every day of his life since he was a little kid. So that, like I said, that things begin to shift. Also, the ugliness of the 2016 election cycle on social media. things began to shift for me. People were not only espousing their own political views, they were being divisive and ugly about them. And so we began to see things outside of our bubble. You know what I mean? Our bubble was diverse, but not divisive, not divided. And suddenly it was diverse and divided. And then all of a sudden we weren't on the same side with some of our friends, some people who we grew up with and cared about. So all of that kind of just melded together. And literally on a weekend, I can't remember at this moment what it was that happened, but I knew that I had to speak to more people than just the people in my group of friends or my circle at church or my circle at school. I had to speak to a larger audience and explain the outcomes, what happens when representation doesn't happen, what happens how much bias we actually have on a regular basis. Procter & Gamble has a great commercial out right now, and it's about a Black guy. You see him in an elevator. They close the elevator, don't let him in. You see him in a pool with his son, and all the kids look, the parents, he's the only Black person in that area. They look at him like, why is he here? And you see him his little boy waves at a classmate, and the mom rolls up the windows. And there's so much bias that we don't confront. And so Small Bites is really about helping people to consider another perspective. There's usually just you're racist and that's wrong. And there's don't call me racist, you don't know me. And that's it. But unless you understand why people are racist, unless you're willing to at least hear their side and say, I understand that, your granddad who flew proudly his Confederate flag and had it in the back of his truck. I understand that you love your granddaddy and you can't say he's an evil man, and I'm not asking you to. However, can you imagine what it's like as a kid to see the Confederate flag and know that Texas was a huge proponent of slavery and that they even kept slaves longer than Lincoln said they should have, and that until 1965 that we weren't allowed to go to the public swimming pool or drink at the same fountain, that I am the first product of integrated schools in Houston. So can you imagine what that feels like for me? As well as, so how can you have place in your heart for both of those things? For loving the things you grew up with, but also acknowledging that they're flawed and what that does to other people, and being willing to, like I said, he ain't heavy, he's my brother, to carry my brother a little ways, to give space for that, to hold space for that.
Something I treasure about your dedication is that you are unapologetic about the fact that strong feelings, witnessing other people's pain and suffering, is not an optional part of this work. However, you don't carry the work. You challenge your viewer, your listener. You challenge, the consumer of your content to look inward. I'm wondering what you would say about the inner work that might be necessary for anyone before any of the outer work can actually begin to take place.
That's what actually the last episode of Small Bites Before Summer, the last episode before my summer starts, because I know we all start at different places across the country. But before going to summer sessions, I'm going to talk about, take all of the books you bought on anti-racism and white fragility, and all of the books that you bought on Black Lives Matter and movements, take them all and sit them over in a corner. Buy yourself a journal. Buy one that you like. Buy it lined or unlined or leather bound or spiral. Buy yourself, spray it with your favorite fragrance. Buy a nice new pen and put that book next to your bed and think about your thoughts and your actions and your childhood, what you were taught, and consider all of those things and who that makes you as a practitioner and as a citizen. And really reflect over, when you read a headline, what does it do to you? Knowing what you really believe about everyday things. What do you believe? What do you think? What is your first reaction when somebody says Black man? A lot of times it's fear. your first vision. What do you envision? Do you see a man in a suit? Do you see police officers? Do you see a man in a white coat, a scientist? Or do you see Run DMC? You know what I mean? As for those who you might not know who Run DMC is, that's an old classic OG rap group. They had on the big heavy gold chains and the big sunglasses, and they were the baggy clothes. So who do you see when you see Black man? Who do you think of now? Now I know when we see Black woman, generally you probably think of a Michelle Obama or Oprah Winfrey or Kamala Harris, or because those are the big images. You don't. When you see Black man, you often see a criminal, someone getting abused, because you get a lot of those videos right now, or you see a rapper or a baller. And so counteracting those, realizing that means that you might miss that the guy who's got the urban swag in your classroom is actually your best science student. He may not, he may throw a lot of slang in the language and you don't think he's really quite ready for the AP classes, but that has nothing to do with his ability. So those are the kinds of things. When I say the inner work is important, yes, read the books. Please do read the books. But before you do, watch the news and pay attention to your own reaction to what's being said at a very basic level, and get to know yourself. You probably won't like some things, but that's a big thing too. Self-love, accepting yourself for your flaws. And so when you go through your own journey and your journaling, make sure that you remember you're okay. If you didn't learn something already, if you still feel something that you find politically incorrect, it's okay. You're the product of your teaching. You got a journal and a pen. You're good. You are on the road. And that's all we can ask of anyone. It's just to be on the road wherever you are, be on the road.
Hedreich, any of our listeners that happen to type your name into a search engine are going to see the first result says Hedreich Nichols, musical artist. And you've gifted me and our listeners with some incredible musical strains. Visitors to your website are going to learn that you had a #1 music video, a double platinum album for arranging, and a Grammy nomination. I'm wondering how you think we might leverage music or visual arts or drama to further equity work and, I guess, further deepen the engagement with it.
Oh gosh, actually at the end of, I think, the May episodes of Small Bites, I actually did a whole lot of content-based material. Or was it? No, it was July, going into the new school year. Yeah. And we talked about, first of all, there are all of these wonderful websites. And I really try to teach my listeners and viewers to be independent learners. So Google something simple like Indigenous playwrights. Google something simple like Hispanic classical composers. Google something simple like, just literally find it. I mean, here's one: Japanese basketball players, not fine arts. I know it's sports, but when we think of the Asian community, we won't think of basketball. They have a huge basketball culture over there. Neither did I. So if you got some kid who wants to, you got a kid in your class and he wants to be a baller, and people are saying, "Oh, dude, you Asian, you can't play ball. What you talking about?" You can show them up. You know what I mean? So finding all of those things in fine arts, there's so many. There are classical composers, there are classical conductors. Bobby McFerrin, who people will generally know as Don't Worry, Be Happy guy. He is a classical composer extraordinaire. So Google Bobby McFerrin and classical music so that your kids will know that there are all of these wonderful, wonderful people out there who do stuff who you might not see, because we generally base our curriculum on the Western classical model. Also, I just actually did put together a course for Coachella Q, and I used to do a thing when I taught music. I did a thing called 100 Years in Music. And we would just go through all different kinds of genres. And so one thing you can do is pick a bass line, pick a set of chord progressions, of popular chord progressions, one for music people out here, 1-4-5-1, and find 1-6-2-5. Find a a whole lot of songs that go over that particular chord progression, and find them from the 20s, find something from the 40s, find something from the 60s, from the 80s, from the 2000s, and from now, and let your kids discover other musicians and other kinds of music that they would not have known. So yeah.
Hedreich, I know that listeners are going to be eager to connect or to reconnect with you and to find out more. What's the best way to reach you?
The cool thing is, if you type in my name, you'll find me everywhere. It's H-E-D as in Dora, R-E, wait, I'll be cool. H-E-D Delta, R-E-I-C-H, Hedreich. And you can find me, it's Hedreich at Hedreich.com. And let's see, Hedreich on Anchor, Hedreich on YouTube, Hedreich on Twitter, Hedreich Nichols on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. So yeah, if you can spell my name, you can find me.
Hedreich, in all the spaces and all the places that you inhabit, what is truly evident and what's truly aligned is the tagline that appears right under your name on your website, and that is changing the world one student, one teacher at a time. I know that listeners are going to be jumping at the opportunity to reflect and to put that into action. Thanks to your time with me today. Thank you so much, Hedreich Nichols, for a fantastic conversation.
Thank you, Brad. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Good News, Brad News podcast. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment wherever you found this podcast. And if you like what you heard, please recommend Good News, Brad News to a friend. And please hit me up on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. You can find me at Brad, B-R-A-D, _Hughes, H-U-G-H-E-S. I look forward to hearing from you and to reconnecting with you on our next episode. Until then, get out there and do amazing things.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.